Hello everyone, and welcome to this fun discussion video about Scourge. So in Guild Wars 2, many of the healing specializations and builds utilize Alacrity. Some of them use quickness, but I tend to prefer Alacrity on my healers, as it's just nice to be able to use my healing abilities more frequently rather than just using them quicker. So when approaching a healing elite specialization / build, I tend to look for that Alacrity, and in recent times we've had Alacrity come on the Tempest, we've had Alacrity come on the Ranger, which then bleeds into the Druid, and there's one elite specialization that is a bit more support slanted that doesn't have access to either Alacrity or Quickness, this being the Scourge. Now in this video we're going to be answering the question of, should Scourge get Alacrity? TLDR, yes. But I also think they should get a lot of other things and updates. I know it's wild. We went from a time period where Scourge was so overpowered and you never wanted buffs or reworks, you just wanted nerfs. But now I feel like it's been some time and I'd be interested in seeing some more pizzazz thrown into the Scourge in general. But let's first talk about the Alacrity potential and its other support features. Now for this, we're going to be looking specifically at the traits. For Scourge, the top line tends to lean more into that healing support role, where your main source of healing comes in the form of barrier. You're more of a preventative healer rather than a reactionary healer. Now, I want to go through and just talk about some of the traits. First and foremost, we have Abrasive Grit. Now this trait is great because it allows your Sand Flare to grant barrier to allies. This used to be a baseline function, but now you have to spec into it, and it also allows any barrier that you apply to cleanse a condition. I would love to see a little bit of tuning on this and allow Sand Flare to give barrier in a much larger radius. For your Sand Flare, applying it to your allies, you have to be very close to people in a 240 radius, and for a healer, you're sometimes not that close to people, or you're trying to go and move somewhere, and being out of range just never feels good. And that's why I would love to see the Sand Flare barrier application be brought up to around 600. I know, this is a little big, but I think it'd be cool. And then of course, removing a condition, but I would also love to see some extra life force generation, so perhaps you would also gain life force when you grant a barrier to allies. Then we have Desert Empowerment. I really don't think that this needs a change, so no change for Desert Empowerment in my opinion. And then finally we come to the Grandmaster Sand Savant. I don't hate me, I don't love this trait. I'm not a huge fan of boiling the shades down to one large shade where it affects a larger area where you place it down, and then also around you. It's also compensated by increasing the cooldown of your sand shade, so it just is also more negatives rather than just feeling like you're more of a stronger support playstyle, and we don't really have a Grandmaster trait for Scourge that plays into that healing support role. So let's change Sand Savant up a bit, and this is where the Alacrity comes into play. First and foremost, instead of reducing your amount of shades down to 1, what if we had a trait that allowed us to gain an extra charge of the sand shade so that we can have one in our back pocket to reposition if we need to? This could also empower our manifest sand shade so that we can get another proc of barrier. And the next we have Desert Shroud. I would love to see a support version of this allow Desert Shroud to not hit enemies, but instead pulse barrier to allies, making it a much stronger final spell to use for your manifest sand shade skills. And then, of course, granting barrier also applies Alacrity. This would be more so just a general application of Alacrity, not specific to Desert Shroud, but this would be a great way to implement Alacrity into the Scourge, allowing those barrier healers to provide that very sought after boon of Alacrity. And without Alacrity, it really keeps Scourge away from those structured groups of endgame content with strike missions and raids. Of course, they have really strong res potential, but this is such a needed facet of a support build that I think Alacrity would be great on this. So those are my ideas around Scourge and its support potential, its healing potential, and of course, Alacrity application. But that's not all that I want to touch on with Scourge, because I think there are other traits that are in need of some tuning and some updates. The middle line is more so focused on condition damage. So I want to take a look at these with the context of current day philosophy of balance. Recently, we've seen the developers get rid of traits where they reduce the cooldown of weapon abilities and instead augment them or further increase them in some capacity. So first and foremost, we have Fell Beacon. Instead of this reducing your cooldowns on your torch abilities, I'd like to see this affect Harrowing Wave. Harrowing Wave has a range of 600, but it's the shortest range of your Scourge kit, as most of your abilities are 900 range based, and it also would line up with the Scepter more if you had a trait where you're taking Fell Beacon allows Harrowing Wave to travel further and grant more life force with each target struck. Of course, gain expertise based on your condition damage. I actually bumped this up to 10% instead of 7% just to make it a little bit stronger. Next, we have Sadistic Searing. This is a bit wonky. I don't know, this trait feels fine. You have some burst potential with your F1 if you take this and of course Doomfire, but maybe just a slight refinement, a little bit less of a qualifier to get that burning would be nice. So Sadistic Searing, my idea for this would just punishment skills inflict burning on foes affected and would grant you a buff which increases your condition damage for a duration. And this would be a buff that you could refresh on yourself using multiple punishment skills. This would increase your condition damage by like 150. I have the duration at 5 seconds. It could probably be bumped up to like 6 or 8 seconds, something along those lines, but something to further increase your condi damage and make it easier to just apply that burning up front rather than waiting for your Manifest Sandshade to come off a cooldown, or if you don't want to move your Sandshade, you know, that's always a kind of a downside to this trait. And coming to the Grandmaster, we have Demonic Lure. This one is the trait, this Grandmaster trait is the one that I take the most, even when I'm on a healer, as we currently don't have a healing focused Grandmaster trait. So Demonic Lure, Torment is stronger and causes your foes to burn. I think this is great. I don't really think there needs to be much of a change. However, I wanted to add a little bit to this, as the interval cooldown of the burning application is 3 seconds. I would love to see something be mixed into Desert Shroud as well. So I thought of the idea like, what if while you're in Desert Shroud, the interval cooldown is reduced to 1 second? So instead of waiting 3 seconds to proc that burning on Torment, it would instead be every 1 second. So technically, theoretically, each pulse of your Desert Shroud would also pulse out that burning, allowing you to get a little bit more out of this trait and for your Desert Shroud to be pushed more strongly into that condition damaged playstyle. And that's the middle line of the conditions, and I think there's just a little bit more wiggle room. And then we come to the bottom trait line. Now this is a little bit more utility based, where it plays more so with boons, life force generation, gaining boons, and it's a bit more different, but I think it has some cool utility that any role of a healer or a condition damage dealer could get use out of. So for the very first trait, Nourishing Ashes, don't think there needs to be a change. And when it comes to Herald of Sorrow, I've actually moved this over to the Grandmaster, as I think it'd be cool if each of the Grandmasters affects Desert Shroud in some way. And we can see that with my suggestions with Sand Savant, Demonic Lure, and then now Herald of Sorrow. So this means that Feed from Corruption would be placed in the Master tier. I don't really think there needs to be much change with Feed from Corruption, as people sometimes take it, and if anything, have just like an interval cooldown of half a second on it. But other than that, I don't think there needs to be much change with Feed from Corruption. And then this brings us to Herald of Sorrow. So because the support healing Grandmaster is more so focused on Sand Savant, I've changed Herald of Sorrow a bit. And in the world where we have a support Grandmaster, you would probably need to change Herald of Sorrow. So for Herald of Sorrow, I've positioned this into more of a net condition damage skill, where you're applying more conditions and you have a bit more breathing room, just to deal damage after a detonation, applying bleeds, torment, and cripple. Kind of a callback to the old punishment style, where punishment skills used to corrupt a boon, and it would be corrupted into Torment and Cripple, but they've removed the Cripple, which I think is smart, but bringing this back into a trait, into the Grandmaster of Herald of Sorrow, could be interesting. So maybe a little bit less condition damage, because you're not getting those burns, but instead you're getting a little bit more of that wider net of conditions with Bleed, Torment, and Cripple. And of course, the boons being converted into conditions still stands. I also would love to see this reduced in the detonation time, down from 3.5 seconds down to 3 seconds, just so that it activates a little bit more quickly and a bit more consistently. And that'll do it with my traits, the top line being a bit more support focused, middle line being a bit more condition damage focused, and the bottom line being a utility-based system where you can kind of take a couple traits if you want more life force, if you want some boons, if you want to corrupt boons, etc., etc. This is not the end though. I want to talk about one of the weaker and more strange utility skills that Scourge has access to, this being Serpent Siphon. Now, I really don't understand, I never will understand why there was a pickup mechanic on Scourge to begin with, as this is the only occurrence of a pickup mechanic on Scourge. And in recent balance philosophy, they've decided to get rid of pickup mechanics. We saw them get rid of all of the pickup mechanics on Revenant, on Ventari. So let's get rid of them a little bit more with Serpent Siphon. And I think that allowing Serpent Siphon to instead be a single target ability would be a little bit more consistent and a bit more useful. So instead of it being an area of effect ability, what if when you targeted an ally, this Serpent would pulse damage on them, applying poison and converting a boon with each bite? And there's also a supportive feature, there's also a healing feature of this skill already, where it creates a sand orb that allies can pick up to gain barrier. Of course, we have ally targeting in the game now, so what if you could choose between an enemy target and an ally target? And if you focused on an ally, that Serpent would pulse a little bit of healing and barrier to that ally, and conversely, instead of converting a boon into a condition, it would convert a condition into regen, playing into that idea of the punishment being mirrored when you are targeting an ally. And with this ability, I would love to see this have some charges on it, where you can kind of alternate between a single target enemy and then target an ally and use this, or spam this on an enemy, or spam this on an ally to get more damage and more poison out, and some more healing and some more barrier. And I love Serpent Siphon, I love the idea of it, but it really doesn't have a place, I feel like, and it's so dependent on you being in an area of effect position with multiple enemies. And if people don't run over the orb, you don't get any support out of this, which is why I love ally targeting skills, because you don't have to rely on allies to key into what's going on in the battlefield and run over it. I'd much rather have more consistent, reliable support features when I'm playing a healer, and ally target is the way. It is the future. So those are my ideas around Scourge. I really think that this is a class that could utilize some improvements, some buffs, and some tailoring, even in the current balance philosophy. I really believe that Scourge would do very well if it had Alacrity, and it really is missing that Alacrity. And I would also really be interested in seeing some slight tweaks and improvements to the condition playstyle of Scourge as well. And then of course, Serpent Siphon. That skill is very strange. But in general, Scourge is still doing very well with its barrier output. Its resurrection potential has not gone anywhere, and it's fun. It's fun. It's just missing a couple of the key components that really are required of certain roles in Guild Wars 2. And so thank you everyone so much for coming on by. Comment down below your thoughts about Scourge in general. Do you also believe Scourge should get some Alacrity? How are you feeling about the condition playstyle, and what about that bottom line in Herald of Sorrow? Anyways, everyone, thank you for coming on by once again. Subscribe, comment down below, and if you'd like to support the channel, head on over to Patreon, get early access to all of these videos. And I stream over on Twitch every day of the week, so come on by and catch me live. Thank you all so very much, and I'll see you later. Bye, everyone!